Okay, so for the rest of the lesson, we're just going to do some examples. So example 5, describing the transformations. So that's when you look at the equation and you describe your transformations. So we already know that what this quarter does is the k value. So our k value is a quarter. Okay, so that means we're horizontally increasing our graph by 4, right? So what we would do is we would multiply our x values by 4 because it's 1 over 4, so we want to flip it and then it becomes 4. So our transformation would be increase horizontally by a factor of 4. Okay, the second example here has an a value and a k value. So for our a value, okay, we're going to increase vertically by a factor of 5. But for our k value, we're going to decrease horizontally by a factor of 1 over 3. Because we have to take our k value and write the reciprocal of it. Okay, so on the next slide here, it's just a nice summary of all of that. Okay, so you can read through this. So horizontal stretches, if k is greater than 1, that means the graph is compressed or decreased horizontally by a factor of k. If it's between 0 and 1, the graph is expanded horizontally or increased by a factor of 1 over k. Okay, and when we graph, we want to use this equation here. Okay, so this tells us what the period is going to be. So you take 360 and divide it by the k value. Okay, here's a couple of examples of practicing this. So sketch one cycle of the graph of the following. So we have a value of 2 and a k value of 3, which means our period is going to be 360 divided by 3, which is 120 degrees. So before we even start, we know that our graph only has to be 120 degrees. That's how long one cycle is going to be. So if you take your x and your y values of your key points, and this is our sine function, okay, we want to multiply our x values by 1 over k. So we want to multiply our x values by a third. Okay, and we want to multiply our y values by 2. Okay, so you're doing x times 90 times a third, right? Or 90 divided by 3. Okay, 180 times a third, 270 times a third, and 360 times a third. And on the y side, you're multiplying all of your values by 2. So zeros stay the same, and our ones are multiplied by 2. Okay, so I'm just doing a rough sketch. I don't have the grid with me here. So my first point is going to be 0, 0. My second point will be 30 and 2. And then 60, 0. 90, negative 2. And 120, 0. So when I graph it, okay, 1 and 0 is going to be, 0, 0. My graph is going to have to go from 2 to negative 2 in order to fit all the points on. And we know from the start, we already figured out that my last point is going to be at 120 degrees because that is how long the period is for this graph. So we're starting at 0, 0, okay, 30 and 2, 60 and 0, 90 and negative 2, and 120 and 0. Okay, and then you can sketch your sine function. Okay, and that's one cycle of this graph. Okay, we could also ask you to write the equations from information or from a grid. So for part A here, we want to write the cosine curve. So that means our base graph is, instead of sine x, we're going to use cos x. And our A value is 0.8, and our period is 240. So what we have to figure out is what our K value is going to be. Okay, so we have this equation, period equals 360 divided by K. So if we're given the period, we can solve for K. Okay, so we can isolate K. So K equals 360 divided by 240. Okay, so our K value is going to be 3 over 2 if we reduce down that fraction. So we have our A value here, 0.8, and our K value of 3 over 2. So we can substitute these into the equation. So our final equation will be 0.8 cos 3 over 2x. Okay, for example B, we're given the graph. So we can figure out our A value based on our amplitude. So if you take a look at the graph, okay, our maximum value is 2. So our A value is 2 because our amplitude is 2. Okay, so our A value is equal to our amplitude, which is 2. And our K value is equal to our period divided by, our 360 degrees divided by the period. So if you look at the graph, okay, it goes from 0, and then this is 180, and then 360, and then 540. So we can add on another 60 degrees, so that'd be 600. Okay, so our K value is going to be 360 divided by 600. So you can reduce your fraction. Which is 3 over 5. Okay, so our A value is 2, our K value is 3 over 5, and this is a sine function. I can tell from my shape that this is a sine function. Okay, so the equation for the second one is y equals 2 sine 3 over 5x.